It's great to be here, and I'm also an alum. Graduated here with my master's degree in business, so I won't say when because most of you probably weren't born yet, so I'm not going to say that, but I am a lot younger than I look. So anyway, I am glad to be here. The book I wrote on interviewing, one of you lucky folks is going to get a copy of it. It is available on Amazon.com, but one of you is going to actually get this book today. So we're going to do the raffle at the end. Is that correct? Correct. Okay. You guys just tell me when. So I work at State Farm corporate headquarters. Director of Financial Services. What that means in English is I do a lot of work with our money and areas of bank, securities, and life and health products. So it's all those types of areas. So for those of you who are interested in the finance, accounting, that world, you can talk to me afterwards, and maybe I can give you some thoughts on careers. And I know State Farm is going to be at the fair as well, so you'll probably see us there. But today I want to talk about, and I've got about 40 minutes to talk about, before my car gets towed, talk about job interviewing. And when I was a student here, Career Center, of course, was doing a great job back then. I don't know if anybody was still here then, but one of the things that I always like to hear from, though, is people from out in the business world talking about what you look for in an interview. Because what I discovered early is that a lot of folks do interviews very badly and do them wrong. And most of them say, well, I just don't know what to do. I don't know what they're going to ask me. It's a bad experience. And so what I'm here to give you is I'm going to give you these top 10 tips. I'm going to rattle through them quickly, but I'm going to give you some direct pointers on how you can be better. What things can you do to improve the chances of getting a job? And there are some definite things you can do, and there are some definite mistakes that you probably have been making. And if nobody's ever told you about them, you're going to make them over and over again, and you're going to get a nice collection of those rejection letters, which you can use to put up on your wall if you want. But the reality is, the job will go me. And what's happening with the marketplace and the amount of people applying for jobs, you have to be stellar in the interviews. If you get to the interview stage, you may be competing with 50 to 100 people for an opening. You have to be stellar. So I'm going to give you some tips and tricks because my goal is I want nothing but ISU students to get jobs because I'm a graduate here. So so I'm in your corner, and we'll make sure this works. But first, before I get started, I always ask this question, is how many people here like to interview? How many people here think it's a pretty cool thing to do, you know? If I had a chance to interview, I'd do it today, no problem. No hands. Why is that? Why don't you like to interview? The more you talk, the better chances you have of winning the book. I don't know if you knew that. Is that true? He's I can make that happen. Why don't you like to interview? Yes, go ahead.
It could be intimidating.
It could be intimidating, not fun, right? Yeah. What else? Yes, go ahead. Yeah, it's unknown. Do you like the unknown? That's not fun, is it? You like to know exactly what's expected of you. It's stressful, right? You're trying for a position that you want, right? You want this job. You really need this job, and you're feeling the stress. So all these things make the interview an unpleasant experience, but they all boil down to how well you can prepare for the interview and what can you do. So I'm going to talk about that, but the first thing I want you to understand is that there is a secret to getting a job in an interview. There's a hidden secret that I, through 20 plus years of doing this and interviewing probably 30,000 people in my day, I mean, I've interviewed a ton, there's a secret that I discovered that I'm going to share with you today. I feel like I'm Billy Mays or something selling it, but there's more. No, seriously, there is a secret which I discovered, that most people go into an interview with the concept of, I'm here to sell myself. I'm here to sell my abilities. You know, if I can sell myself better than the next person, if I can sell myself better than you, I'm going to get the job, right? But that's not necessarily everything that's involved in an interview. In fact, that often isn't the deciding factor. What I discovered the deciding factor is the title of my book, the concept of doubt. And let me talk very briefly about what doubt means, and then we're going to jump into the top 10 here. Doubt means that when you are interviewing with somebody, so if I'm interviewing with you, what's your name?
Stephanie.
How you doing, Stephanie? You're brave sitting in the front row. Everybody wanted to go in the back. So Stephanie, if I'm interviewing with you for a job, you've got my resume, right? And you look through my resume. When Stephanie looks at my resume, Stephanie is automatically going to have some doubts about me being able to do the job. And that is completely normal and natural. Why? Because you're looking at my resume, making some thoughts about it, going, yeah, look at this, he got a D when he was a freshman. Uh-oh, I wonder what that means. And he doesn't really have experience in the area that I'm looking for, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to create doubts based on my resume. If the doubts are too high, Stephanie's not going to want to interview me. But if the doubts are, okay, I've got some doubts, but I'd like to hear how it works, Stephanie's going to interview me. And then my goal in the interview is to remove those doubts in her mind. Now, has Stephanie told me what those doubts are? No. You're not going to be that nice, are you? And interviewers don't do that. We don't say, I got 3 doubts about you, and if you could cover these 3, You're gold. No, we don't do that. We have doubts, and that's normal. That's human beings have doubts about things, and my job is to anticipate what your doubts might be. So if I'm interviewing for a job with Stephanie and you're in a bank, and I don't have banking background, I might think that's a doubt you have. You've never really worked at a bank, but now you're applying to be at a bank. What you don't want to do ever, ever, ever is the traditional approach is to ignore doubts, which means ignore weaknesses. It means don't bring it up, don't say anything. I'm not going to talk about no banking. Because Stephanie knows I have no banking, right? If I ignore it, that doubt will sit in the corner of the interview, and at the end of the interview, after I shake hands and walk away, Stephanie's going to go, well, he's a nice guy, and he dresses well, but reality is he doesn't have a banking background, and I'm not going to hire him. That's a red flag, right? You're going to send me a nice little rejection letter. So my job, in order to have a shot, is I have to give Stephanie a reason why not having banking background still makes me qualified to work here. I need to talk about classes I might have taken that touch banking. I might have talk about how I've been banking since I was 12, and here's all the things I've done. I need to talk about things that help remove that doubt so she can see, okay, he's never worked at a bank, but he gets it. Or he's worked at jobs similar with money and has a good understanding. If you don't target and remove doubt in the minds of the interviewer, the doubts rarely go away on their own. They sit there and ferment during the interview, and at the end, they will kill you. So, in the interview, Stephanie's got you didn't know you'd be picked on this much, did you? We should give her a book just for that. Maybe I will. But Stephanie's sitting here going through my resume. She has ideas on doubts, and my job is to remove them. Secondly, Stephanie's going to have doubts created during the interview. Might be things that I've said. Might be my body language. It might be what I wore, It might be a whole lot of things that are creating doubt in Stephanie's mind. So Stephanie is seeing new doubts that I have to make sure not to add. I have to have good eye contact. I have to have good voice. I have to have all the things that don't add doubt, and then I don't have to do things that are asking silly questions which create doubt. And I'll give you an example. I'll give you a couple examples. Having interviewed lots of ISU students, I can give you lots of examples, but I won't give any names, of course. One doubt that can be created is, are you really interested in the job? It's actually number 10 on my top 10 interviewing list. Know your company. One of the questions that we ask at State Farm, which might just shock the heck out of you, but we ask a very simple question. What do you know about State Farm? What a shock. Why would we ask that question? So, I would say on average about half the students that I've asked that question to, ISU students, look at me with that blank look like, wow, that's a good question. Who'd have thought you were going to ask me what I know about State Farm when you're from State Farm? What a shock. So that right away creates doubt. When I ask, what do you know about State Farm, and you look blankly at me or give me an answer like, well, you're a big insurance company. Yeah, good guess. And you're in Bloomington. Right. You drive past us on the way to Veterans, right? If that's the level of the knowledge you have, what doubt did that create in my mind? What doubt did it create?
You don't want it.
Yeah. You didn't really spend any time researching this, so you really didn't care. So if I hire you, what kind of attention are you going to give? So that's when doubts during the interview can create a problem. Second example could, when you ask questions in an interview. In an interview they say, do you have any questions for us? What's the worst thing you can say when they say, do you have any questions for us? No. That's the worst thing you can say, because that means I'm done. You've tapped me out. I have no more knowledge to share, and I have no more questions. So when I say, do you have any questions for me, you need to ask a good question that requires some thought and something you couldn't have found out on your own. In other words, you don't want to ask, well, how many zones does State Farm have? Or how big is your company? Or something like that when that's on the internet. Back in the old days when I went to college, we didn't have an internet. I know, the dark ages. But we had power and we had plumbing, but we did not have the internet. So I didn't have the luxury of going on an internet and getting a whole slew of stuff when I interviewed for classes. And I won't look to anybody in the room, but somebody in the room might be old enough to remember this. As I actually... You're nodding, thanks you. I actually had to go to the library, that big building over there with the books, and I had to actually open up annual reports and read the annual reports of the company I was interviewing with. Wow, I know. Today, there's no excuse not to be knowledgeable about the companies you're interviewing with. Even if you're going to the career fair or to the intern and you're talking to companies, if you've targeted 4 or 5 companies, knowing a few things about that company is gold. You don't have to have the whole history of the company, but know a little bit about what they do and talk when you say, hey, I'm very interested in X company. I've noticed you guys have these many sales, and I just noticed that. That goes a long way to removing doubt in our mind that you're serious, versus you just walk up going, yeah, what do you got here? I mean, that's a whole different approach. So ideally, you need to know your company so you don't create doubt. And asking questions in the interview is important. One question I got in the interview from an ISU student, not picking on you guys, but just to be honest, I said, do you have any questions for me? And his question was, yeah, if I get the job, can I have Fridays off? That was the question. Wow. You think that's a good question?
That's hilarious, but no, it's not a good question.
That was hilarious. Now, he might have genuinely wanted Fridays off, and he told me why he wanted Fridays off, and it was for some reasons that I won't repeat. You know, he just basically wanted to go out and do stuff. That's wonderful. I'm very happy for that, but that's not an appropriate question to ask in an interview. That creates doubt. Are you really thinking about the job, or are you already planning for how you're not going to be working, doing stuff? I think I told him something like, you get every day off. You got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you got them all off. Enjoy, because we're not hiring you. So, you know, you have more than enough time. So, doubt. Doubt is the key factor. So as you're preparing for interviews, as you're looking at your background and you're targeting certain companies that you want to work for, in other words, you're saying, I'd really like to work for State Farm, or I'd really like to work for Caterpillar, or whomever. As you're targeting companies that you would like to work for, you need to anticipate the doubts that may be in the minds of the people looking at your resume or in the interview, and how you can be prepared to address those doubts. And there could be a myriad of things that they are, but the better job you do in removing that doubt, the better job you do targeting that doubt, the better, because people hire the people they're the most confident in. If I'm interviewing you six for a job, and you've got different backgrounds and different resumes, and I like Stephanie because she's the one I know her name, but the rest of you, as I'm interviewing you, the bottom line is, the person that I'm the most confident in to do the job is the one I'm going to hire. And if that turns out to be Stephanie because I'm the most confident in her abilities, I will hire her even if she's not the most experienced, even if she doesn't necessarily have the best grades, even if she doesn't, which I'm sure you do. But all those things, Stephanie would get the job because I'm the most confident in Stephanie. So you need to instill confidence in the people that are interviewing you. And you do that instilling confidence by anticipating what doubts they could have, which is difficult, by the way. Sometimes that really hits the old ego. You're like, well, why wouldn't they want to hire me? I'm special, I'm great. Well, okay, that's wonderful. But the reality is we all have doubts that come into any interview. And you need to take your ego, put it up on a shelf, and realize, okay, let me look at myself. What things could they have concerns about? And then you need to be prepared to address those. Ignoring them works about 0% of the time. Because in the end, those doubts are what often leads to the rejection letters in an interview. Those nice little letters that say, thank you, we found somebody better qualified. What they could say, to be more accurate, is, we found somebody who I had less doubt about. But then I wouldn't have written a book if they said that. So the reality is, that is the facts around it. And it makes logical sense if you think about it. Because if you guys were hiring people, and some of you might work at jobs where you've actually had to hire people, the person you hired was probably the person you were the most confident in, the person you thought could do the job the best. Not necessarily the person you liked the best, but the person you thought could do the job. So, does that make sense? Doubt. So you need to be thinking about that, and you need to anticipate as you do your interviews. Okay, let's go through the top 10 list, and then I can answer some questions, and then I think I'm out of time. So, know your company. We talked about that. Number 10. Know a little bit about your company. Do research. It is a great way, even when you're up there introducing yourselves to potential interns or internships or whatever. Talking about that goes a long way to understanding about your company. Number 9, know yourself. Use a theme-based answer for the tell me about yourself. One great question that everybody loves, right, is tell me about yourself, right? I won't pick on Stephanie anymore. She looks like she's going to cry. So I'll go to somebody else. Hi, what's your name?
Michael.
Michael, nice to meet you, Michael. So tell me about yourself, Michael.
Well,
I'm not really. I just was asking. That's an example. I'm just kidding, Michael. You're playing along well. So tell me about yourself is a question that is open-ended, right? What does that mean? In fact, it's the only open-ended question of an interview. Everything else, we're going to hammer down questions. But if I'm asking Michael, tell me about yourself, do I want to know about where you grew up? Do I want to know you when you went to high school or college? No, not really. Not interesting. Do I want to know about your college career? Maybe. But I got your resume and your transcript here. I know that already, Michael. So what else do you think I would want to know from Michael?
accomplishments.
Some accomplishment. I see that here. Got it on your resume. You're a pretty accomplishment. That's pretty good. See, so what happens in an interview is most people give what I call the oral resume. So I graduated from ISU in 2011. I'm studying finance, and I hope to get a job. I know all those things. What you really want to talk about in a tell me about yourself is a theme-based answer, which talks about who you really are. You know, what makes you tick? What makes you unique? What makes you the person that I want to talk to? That gets more to your competencies and your background and your personality than your resume. So that could sound something like this. So I'm the kind of person that likes to, so you talk about your traits. I love somebody who likes to research. I'm somebody who really likes working with people. I like numbers. I like coming up with ways to solve that. I'm a technology person. I like using technology to solve technical problems. I love marketing. I love looking at new products and how can we market those. That's talking about who you are as a personality. And it gets closer to the question that you sometimes got in interviews. We don't do them as much anymore because they sounded a little threatening. But the question sounded like this. Tell me why I should hire you. Michael, why should I hire you instead of Stephanie? And that put a lot of people on the spot, but it really got to the core of, tell me why I should hire you. And I wish they asked that question more because the tell me about yourself goes all into weird. One time I interviewed somebody and I said, tell me about yourself. And she started off with, well, I was born in Carbondale. I went, uh-oh. And I think my face even showed an uh-oh because I'm like, this is going to be a long one. And it was 20 minutes later. I learned everything about her. I knew where she went to school and she had a twin and she studied in Europe. And I mean, I learned everything. It was painful. That's not what you're looking for in a tell me about yourself. Instead, I'm trying to learn about you because in an interview, I've got your resume. I can see your grades. I can see your accomplishments. I can see if you had an internship. I can see some things, but I don't know you. And one of the doubts that always happens in an interview is I don't know your personality, your work ethic, there's a whole lot of factors that I don't know about you. And the more you can remove that doubt, the better. And sometimes doubts can be created because of your body language or other things to make me wonder, okay, who is this person? I don't really know you. Now, if we all hung together for like 2 weeks before an interview and got to know each other real well, went out to dinner and talked and went out to the ISU game, then it wouldn't matter. We know more about you. But in an interview, you don't have that luxury. You've got 1 or 2 hours to learn about you. I already know your background. Reiterating it is not going to help you. I need to know about you. What kind of a person are you? And once you bring that personality out, that work ethic, I'm a hard worker. I'm somebody who really likes to dig into getting something done. I'm very quality focused. All these are traits that each of you have that needs to come out. And when it does, you'll be amazed at how much better the interview goes because suddenly we understand who you are. So, theme-based answer. It's tougher because it requires you to kind of look inside and see who am I and what am I bringing. Number 8, practice. Interviewing needs to be practiced. A great way to do it is a mock interview. Have you guys gone through mock interviews? You guys do it here at the Career Center, don't you? Mock interviews? Okay. Mock interviews are practice interviews. You got to do it. You only get better if you practice. But my advice is practice with somebody you don't know. And if you don't know anybody, if you don't know them at the Career Center, that's great. But having a roommate mock interview you, or some people have like their mother mock interview them, or a friend, that doesn't help because they know you. They already know who you are, and they're going to overlook certain personality traits and things that might be valuable to talk to. So if you're somebody who's loud and you're used to that, in a mock interview, you're not going to say anything because you know that person. But somebody who doesn't know you might say, whoa, breaking the eardrums here. You need to tone down. So you might get better advice, more honest advice. But practice is key. Number 7, ask questions. Prepare 3 to 4 good questions. We talked about this earlier. You need to ask questions that involve some research. A great question you could ask a company is, I was out on your website, and while I was there, I read last year's financials and saw some stuff. Could you tell me a little bit about how the growth has happened in this particular line of business? Or, I've done some research, and I noticed that you're entering a new market. Or, I've done some research, and whatever is about the company you're looking for, you ultimately want to show that you've done research and can ask a question that builds off of it. Avoid basic questions. That creates doubt. Means that you really haven't done much research. And it amazes me sometimes, prep for an interview. I know students who study longer for a geography exam than they do preparing for an interview for a job. And you need to take that time to prepare so that you come across prepared. Because I can tell you, we interviewers, we can tell very quickly if you've prepared or not. You're not going to fool us. Trust me, we've done this long enough. We can tell pretty quickly. And so the people who haven't prepared much, people have kind of not gone out and done a lot of research and are just sort of winging it and hoping for the best. I'm sorry, when we're interviewing lots of people, that's not an easy way to set yourself apart. Well, it is. You're setting yourself apart, but negatively, so you don't want to do that. So do research, get some good questions, and have them ready. Number 6, hold the calls. You never want to take a cell phone into an interview, right? Everybody knows that? What people will do, though, is they'll put it on a vibrate setting. Now, why doesn't that work so well? You can still hear the vibrate. In fact, I was in an interview one time where a young lady had a very small purse and had apparently a very large phone in there, and the thing started going, somebody was calling, and it started moving down the table. And we both were like trying not to make eye contact with it, but it was clear somebody was calling her. Well, it finally stopped, much to her relief and mine. Nobody said a word, and then it started ringing again. That person was persistent, and she grabbed her phone. Now, what she did, I understand mistakes happen, but guess what she did when she took her phone out of her purse? She didn't just turn it off. What did she do? She answered it. She wanted to see who it was. Yeah, I can't talk right now. I'm in an interview. Okay, thanks. Okay, we're ready now. Great. Doubt meter just went off. I should build a doubt meter for interviews, and I can tell you where you are. Kind of like those tracking polling they have on television, and so you can start getting panic, going, okay, what am I doing? Why is it going up? Well, come on, work it down. I'm serious. I'm not going to make one, but you should think about that when you're in an interview. So never take a cell phone in there. Turn it off. Don't have it on vibrate. It's actually I've heard advice not to even take your watch in, because you don't want to look at your watch during an interview. Provide important details first. Number 5. This is important. So in a lot of interviews, you're going to be asked a question, and a lot of them are behavior-based now, and it sounds like this. Tell me about a time when blank, 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 right? And the theory of behavior-based interviewing is that past experiences, it will determine future. So how you did something in the past is how you do it in the future. So tell me about a time when you worked under a tight deadline to get something accomplished. You're going to tell me a real story of something you did in class or at a job or something, and I'm going to apply that to how you do it in the future if I gave you a tight deadline. So if I said, how'd you do if I gave you a tight deadline, give me an example, and Stephanie said, well, as soon as I got it, I cried for an hour because it was under a tight deadline. Well, that's what Stephanie's going to do later. She's going to cry for an hour. You wouldn't do that, would you? No, you're not going to tell me that in an interview either. But what you're going to tell me is something that you did in the situation that I'm going to apply to later. The problem is, most of you will answer questions incorrectly. You will answer them in what I call a pyramid approach. Pyramid means you're giving the background details first, and then you get to the result at the end. And if you're familiar with the STAR technique, which is a popular interviewing technique, you talk about the result at the end. What it gets to is, here's the background leading up, and then here's the result. So if I say, Michael, tell me about a time when you worked under a tight deadline. Michael says, well, 3 months ago I was in this class and we were assigned a project and 4 of us were asked to research. He's given me a lot of background leading up to the end, and here's how I was able to get it all done because I pulled everyone together and set schedules and blah, blah, blah. Why is that approach bad if you start with the background first? You could bore the interviewer. You're telling things up front that are catching your attention at that time, which are not really pertinent to the job. So what's going to happen in an interview, and you watch this, when you start telling an example, they're going to write probably in the first, I'm going to be generous, minute to 2 minutes. They're going to actually write what you're saying. Well, in the case of Michael giving that answer, I'm going to write down that Michael was in a class 3 months ago and he had 4 people work together and they had this goal and that goal, and then I'm going to get tired and stop writing. What I'm not going to write is the result, where Michael says, and here's what I did and how I did it and blah, blah, blah. That make sense? So in the end, it's better that you reverse it and do what I call inverted pyramid. Inverted pyramid means in English that you start with the most important stuff first, and any of you who read newspaper, magazine, anything, they write their articles in inverted pyramid, which means the headline, the important stuff's first, and then it whittles down until the last paragraph is in theory the least important of all of them. Newspapers do that because they realize people will read and drop out. If we all read the same article, long article, we would all drop out at different points, and one of us crazy people might finish to the very end, but most of us would drop out. Well, in an interview, you're sort of doing that, only you're reversing the article. Read an article from the bottom up, and that's what you're doing. So you tell all the boring background stuff in the headlines at the end. Well, nobody's paying attention, or maybe not paying attention. So the risk you run, so you need to get the important details up front. So tell me about a time when you worked under a tight deadline. You should say, I worked on a project where I was able to reorganize and accomplish in 1 week what normally took 2 weeks, by coming up with a new approach to organization and software, blah, blah, blah. It gets my attention going, wow, you came up with a new approach to do that. Then you go into the background. Let me tell you a little bit about this. Now, I've written down what you accomplished. The next person who doesn't use this style, I wrote down that you worked 3 to 4 months with somebody else. Who do you think in the end, when I look through my notes, and remember, a lot of times in interviews, we're interviewing multiple people at once. I mean, you're all special, don't get me wrong. But the reality is, after I've interviewed about 12 people in a day, it's like they're all blurring. I rely on notes to say, okay, what exactly did you say, and what exactly did the next person say? And in one case, I have, you work 3 to 4 months on something, and the next one I accomplished this goal. So, does that make sense? Human mind is programmed to go through a story, though, from the background until the results at the end. That's just how we're wired. You have to force yourself to change that and get it out front. Pretend you only have 30 seconds to give an answer. Boom, get it out there, and then you'll be better off. Make sense? Okay. Next, number 4, organize your answers. This is a big one. One of the key mistakes people make in interviews, there's several. And by the way, do you know one of the top reasons people don't get a job and don't do well in an interview? Is they show lack of enthusiasm for the job. That's actually been studies that have been out there that said that. And that's amazing to think, right? Because you want the job. Didn't we say earlier about how you're excited and you want this job? But why do you think the enthusiasm doesn't come out? Fear. You're in an interview. You're nervous. So you're going to sit nice and quietly and you're going to just give the answers because you're petrified. And you don't really have this fun. You're not really having a good time, right? Well, that can be perceived as a doubt that you're not really interested in the job. So ironic, isn't it? So you need to be saying things like, thank you for this opportunity. I'm really excited about the opportunity to work for you, blah, 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 so that we know that you're very interested. Otherwise, you could be lethargic about it and we'll say, well, you get the job, how are you going to be? Are you going to be excited when you get it? Or if it's better than starving, I guess I'll work for him. You know, we want it to be something that's a positive. Well, it is better than starving, but you don't want to say that. Organizing your answers means all of you are doing things in classes now, and if you have internships for sure, or any kind of work studies or any kind of works you have, where you're doing things that are demonstrating competencies. Okay, what that means in English is when you're interviewing for a job, there's competencies for that job that we're looking for. Things like teamwork, problem solving, communication, initiative. These are all general competencies. I don't know, in the Career Center, do you have a list of standard competencies in the business world?
We probably have several, yes.
Okay, so what I'm talking about is those are important to understand because when you're applying for a job, they're going to try and identify how you have demonstrated those competencies so that they can understand what kind of an employee you'll be. Okay? So what's important for you to have are examples that show how you demonstrated teamwork, how you demonstrated initiative, how you demonstrated problem solving, how you demonstrated all these different competencies so that when we ask a question like, tell me about a time when you worked with a teammate to get something accomplished, we're trying to understand how you work as a team. And we're asking that from an example from your past. The problem is if you have not documented this or done anything to try and remember it, you're using your memory to try and figure it out, and that's dangerous because then you have one of the biggest complaints I've seen in interviews is lack of detail in an answer. You give a very broad answer, but you don't have a lot of detail because you don't really remember. I mean, you were in this class last year, you did something, you're not remembering all the specifics, so you kind of give me a thin answer. What you don't realize is that creates a bad impression. Means, as a doubt, that you really don't have a lot of detail behind it, which means, was this really that special? And then it's not going to really demonstrate what you do. Students like yourselves undersell yourself tremendously in interviews because you've not done anything to organize and have data prepared so that you can give the best answers. And I can guarantee you that at other schools, I was down at the University of Texas not long ago and talked about that, they're putting things in place where they're trying to encourage their students to build what I call knowledge libraries. And why I'm suggesting it to you is you need to be capturing somehow the things that you're doing in classes and work and other places so that you can retrieve these later and refresh your memory. It could be as simple as creating 5 or 6 folders and having some key competencies at the heading of these folders. And every time you demonstrate something that you think shows teamwork or initiative or problem solving, that you take a few seconds to write it down on a piece of paper, the back of a napkin, whatever, and throw it in these folders so that you can start building a library of experiences that could be the basis of an interview. Okay, does this make sense? So instead of just relying on your memory, which, trust me, if you're like my memory, you're going to forget most of this, most of what you see in here. If you take a few seconds to start documenting that, and by the way, when you enter the workforce, like where I'm working, it's extremely valuable to do that because you're constantly needing to go back to demonstrate the things that you've done. Instead of relying on your memory, I can go to my equivalent of this library. In my book, I call it a kudos file, but essentially, I can go through those and remind myself, boom, here are the things I did, and I am shocked at the stuff that I forgot about. That had I not been able to articulate that in an interview, would definitely undersell the things that I've accomplished. So sometimes the best people in interviews are the ones that have the best organization to reiterate stuff, not necessarily the one that's done the most. So you could be doing the most. Michael, you could be extremely skilled in all these things, but if you have no way to recall that information and store it so that you can remember it, you're not going to share it and nobody's going to know. Sorry, we're not clairvoyant, we're not omniscient, we can't see all of it in there and go, oh, we understand. If you don't demonstrate it to us and explain it, we're never going to know it. And I know students who are extremely talented people who've done a ton of things that are horrible with their memories and have done nothing to capture it and have not been able to find a job, still, several years after graduating. And they're sharp people. Now that's sad, right? That's too bad. We can all go through all that sad, but guess what else it is? It's bad for them because they're poor and they hate it and they just are frustrated. And I don't want to see anybody go through college to do that and then not do a good job of being able to articulate that. So my advice, which is advice I wish I had when I was your age because nobody really told me that, is you need to start capturing those examples now because they will be invaluable when you have an interview. And again, nothing fancy. I'm not talking about buying some big database program. One guy was going to program it in DBase or something. I don't know what. I go, whatever. Instead, I'm just looking at folders where you can actually start capturing this information and be able to recall it. Refresh your memory when you go into an interview. When they say, talk about the leadership examples you've had, and you've got in the folder 7 examples where you demonstrated leadership, be it in a fraternity or sorority, or through a club, or in class, or at a job. Trust me, if you don't write them down, you will forget most of them. And then you're going into interviews with people who may be capturing all these. And what do you think is going to happen? If they've captured them and can recall them, you're kind of in trouble. So you need to be thinking about how to capture that. Number 3, watch nonverbals. We talked a little bit about that. Some examples are posture, fidgeting, eyes. One guy in an interview cracked me up. Now who can do this? I'm going to be impressed if you can do this. Is you take the pen and you roll it on your hand. Can anybody do that? You know what I'm talking about, right?
I can't do it, but I know what you're
You know what I'm talking about? Okay. You know what I'm talking about, guys? This is really good. Yeah, you're sort of doing it there. Yeah, that's kind of cool, where you can flip it around. Only this guy was so good, he did it with both hands. And in the interview, he was going back and forth, and I'm like, this is amazing. And so I said, I have a question for you. He goes, sure. I said, have you ever been on Jay Leno? I mean, have you thought about going on television? And he went, oh my God, and he put the pens down. He goes, I'm sorry. You never realize the things that you're doing in an interview unless you've actually been able to observe the fidgeting that you do. Like, I know one thing I do that I always have to watch is what I'm doing now. I talk with my hands a lot. So in an interview, I'm almost knocking things over because I'm waving my hands. So when you do a videotaping like's happening now, and you can tape yourself in an interview, in a mock interview, in a practice, and you guys do that here, right? You have videotaping? So I'm giving you guys plugs. Is that good? Yeah, I hear the thumbs up. That's important because then you could look at yourself and go, holy cow, I didn't realize that I was doing this or that. Sometimes, one lady, I was pulled her hair the whole time. I was afraid stuff was going to come out. I mean, it was just a nervous thing, and it's not something you're conscious of. It's like with me with my hands. You just don't think about it. But once you see yourself doing it, it gives you a little bit of lessons. Okay, I better watch that. You can also hear your rate of voice. Do you talk too fast? Talk too slow? You talk too loud? You talk too quiet? All these things are influences and can cause issues in interviews. So nonverbals are key. Studies have shown that 90% of all communication is nonverbal, not the words that you're using. So I'm saying words now and you're listening to the words. Your ears are hearing me and interpreting it in your brain. But the reality is only 10% of the meaning is the choice of the words I'm picking. 90% is my body language, my voice, all the other things that go with the message. Isn't that hard to imagine? So I tell people all the time, you've got to be careful in an interview when a lot of that messaging is coming across from your body language, not just that you pick the right words. Okay, does that make sense? Number 2, thank you notes. Boy, this is a big one. It always amazes me. Thank you notes are wonderful things. People always say, oh, you're buttering them up, or, why do you send a thank you note? Thank you notes show that you're appreciative, they're easy, they're inexpensive, and they're important to do. So after an interview, you always want to send a thank you. Thank you should be brief. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Looking forward to hearing from you. Very brief. Don't write a 4-page thank you note. Don't try and overwhelm them. It's just a quick thank you. You should be saying thank yous to mock interviews, to people you've done informational interviews with. Everybody know what an informational interview is? Anybody not know? Some of you don't know. Informational interviews are nice. If you're thinking about working for a certain company, instead of an interview where they're asking you questions, you ask, usually it's an HR department does it, human resources, will do an informational interview with you where you get to ask them questions. And it's basically got going in and saying, tell me a little bit about your business. Tell me a little bit about your company. It's a great way to learn about that business, and it sometimes can open doors to potential opportunities. Informational interviews. If you do an informational interview, you should send a thank you note. Thank you for the opportunity. At State Farm, I've had people do that. They'll contact me and say, could I have an informational interview? Can we talk about some career opportunities? And then I'll sit down and chat with them, and it sometimes can give them exposure to different areas of the company that they never would have known. The old days, well, in my day, it was classified ads, but in your day, it's MonsterCom and whatever else. Waiting for those and looking at those and waiting for the phone to ring and sending in resumes, I'm sorry, that's not really a very good recipe to getting jobs. You need to be proactive, contacting companies and being active. Waiting for the phone to ring or waiting for a letter to come in the mail that says, hey, we would just love to have Stephanie working for us. Just love it. That doesn't happen. It rarely happens. Once in a while it will, but it's rarely. You have to be proactive. Proactive means doing things like informational interviews, building your network, contacting alums. I know at ISU they've got a lot of contacts with different universities or different businesses and different alums that work at those universities and businesses. Leverage those businesses. Leverage those people that were alums that work at different companies. You have to do that. That's not cheating. That's not being political or whatever words you want to use. Networking is part of reality. And the last one on here, number 1, is removing doubt, as we talked about. The person that they hire is very often the one they're the most confident in. Translated, the one that has removed the most doubt in your mind. So you need to anticipate that doubt. You cannot create new doubt. You don't want to create doubt by not being well prepared. You don't want to create doubt by asking bad questions. You don't want to create doubt by having bad body language. You want to recognize that your role is to go in with the lowest doubt, and it's like a golf score. Lower score gets the job. So you want to be prepared to do that. If you do those things, hopefully it gives you another approach to look at how you can job interview, and hopefully it can make you successful in your job hunt. So I've gone quickly because I know you're all eager to see who wins the book here.
You only got an extra 5 minutes. We owe you 5 minutes if you want to, take time to take questions.
Well, I can do that. I can certainly take some. I can take some questions. I'd be more than happy to. So, any questions? Yes, go ahead.
State Farm is a private company, I believe.
It's a mutual.
So how is there a good way to find information about companies that aren't publicly traded, for example?
Well, mutual company like State Farm is it's not traded, but it is out on the internet. And I found that a lot of even small businesses that are privately held will have internet sites, so you can go out there and do research. If the company doesn't have a website, and most companies do, but if they don't have a website, another way to contact them is just call, introduce yourself, and said, "Can I come in and do some information and learn about your company?" And a lot of times, places like ISU here will have research that they'll have stored on different companies. You can absolutely do. So you can't have enough good information when you go into an interview. Trust me. And beyond the basics. Remember, back in the old days with me, there wasn't a whole lot of sources of getting information, so expectations were lower. I can tell you right now, with the internet and with all the context you can have, at least my expectations are pretty high. When you come in to an interview, you should really know your stuff because there's no excuse not to. You can learn a lot out there. So, yeah, what else? Yeah, go ahead.
As far as thank you notes go, would you recommend handwritten or typed?
It's a good question.
See that kind of working against yourself.
Yeah, that's a good question. I tend to like handwritten because they're more personal and I don't know about you, but I get a billion emails. So, having something in writing now is kind of cool to read. But at the minimum, do an email. Emails can be impersonal. By the way, if you do a handwritten one, make sure you write it carefully, nice handwriting. I don't want to have to figure out the code. What in the world are you trying to say? I saw some people write it, and it looks like they were writing it while their car was moving. I mean, it's just all over the place. That's not good. Take a few seconds. You should write it yourself. One time I saw a thank you note that I'm convinced the guy had his girlfriend or somebody write it for him because it was definitely not his type of handwriting. And then at the bottom was his so he loaned it out to somebody to write the thank you notes, which I guess shows good delegation. Maybe that's leadership. I don't know, but not kind of tacky. Yes.
You mentioned kind of asking about what you know about the company in the interview. As someone who's being interviewed, how long should you go on about that? I mean, if you know quite a few details.
I wouldn't go too long. I would give salient information. If they say, tell me, what do you know about our company? You can give a few basic details. Well, as I did my research, I learned this and this and this, and I think this is very interesting. Yeah, you don't want to overwhelm. You don't want to scare them. But it is cool to kind of bring up a couple things that aren't terribly well known. So maybe you read an article in Business Week that talks about it and said, yeah, and I read last week's Business Week mentioned this and this. That's impressive when people do that to me. I go, wow, I didn't know that. And now right away, my doubt meter's gone down because I'm like, wow, this person actually has gone out of his way to learn. I mean, it's little stuff like that that can really make a good impression, I guess I should say. By the way, another quick thing about dress. You should avoid wearing sweaters to interviews. I don't know if you guys have heard this, but sometimes people wear a sweater, and it can look pretty nice. I interviewed somebody one time that wore a ski sweater to an interview, and it was in February. And had we done the interview outdoors, I think he'd have been just fine. But we actually interviewed him indoors, so guess what happened? He started heating up badly, and it started to sweat, and it was painful to watch. And so from a clothing standpoint, you want to dress comfortably. You want to practice in a mock interview with the clothes you're going to use for an interview. I can't tell you the number of times I'm interviewing people and I'm convinced they haven't worn that clothes since high school, and they're not quite the same size as they were in high school, and now they're trying to squeeze into it and they don't have time to buy new clothes because the interview is happening, and you can tell just it's painful. So you want to be recognizing if maybe I need some different clothes. So practice with those clothes. Don't just put them on that day. And if they're new, take off the tags. I've seen more than a few people. One guy in an interview, I said, "Oh, I didn't know Backracks had a sale." He goes, "How do you know?" And well, it was hanging on his tag. So that was a little embarrassing.
Thank you for coming and speaking. For us.
Okay, great. Thank you all very much.